And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, and X. Don't forget that you can take the show with you on demand by checking out the Nick Craig Show podcast wherever you get your shows. Tap the subscribe and follow button, and you'll get a new program delivered each and every morning. Our show this morning is brought to you by the Law Group. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. We'll have some more details coming up on them a little bit later in the program this morning. Well, some major international news taking place yesterday that is getting seemingly very little media coverage. It's just kind of a sub-headline on most of the major news sites this morning as President Donald Trump held two different phone calls yesterday, one with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the other with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, and with that, President Trump making a major announcement on Truth Social. His post reads as follows. Just completed my 2-hour call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. I believe it went very well. Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations towards a ceasefire and, more importantly, an end to the war. The conditions for what will be negotiated between the two parties, as it can only be because they know the details of a negotiation that nobody else would be aware of. The tone and spirit of the conversations were excellent. If it wasn't, I would say so now rather than later. Russia wants a large-scale trade with the United States when this catastrophic bloodbath is over, and I agree. There is a tremendous opportunity for Russia to create a massive amount of jobs and wealth, and its potential is unlimited. Likewise, Ukraine can be a great beneficiary on trade in the process of rebuilding its country. Negotiations between Russia and the Ukraine will begin immediately. I have so informed President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine and many other people of the European Union as well, also noting that the Vatican, as represented by the Pope, has stated that it would be interested in hosting some of these negotiations. Let the process begin. This is a major announcement from President Donald Trump yesterday. And let me be clear with this. Let's not put the cart before the horse, proverbially here, right? Obviously, things can still change. Obviously, what we were told yesterday could fall apart very quickly, depending on how things roll out over the next couple of weeks. But the one thing that you're seeing as it relates to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine that you hadn't seen in years past was progress. Now, even the smallest amount of progress, even moving the football 1 yard down the field, while it's not great, it's not a touchdown, it's still progress. And I am a strong believer that if even small incremental steps are taken over time, which they have been over the last 100 plus days, as long as those incremental steps continue to happen, eventually we will end up in a position where we've got peace, some level of peace between Russia and Ukraine, where we've got some level of negotiation that takes place between these two countries to, as what President Donald Trump notes, stop the bloodshed. Stop the waging war and stop the fighting that is going and leading nowhere. You've heard me say this before. Neither country is winning. Russia is stagnant in what they're doing. Ukraine is barely holding their defense. There's no winner here. There's not going to be some grand victorious party that comes out of this war and wins under your traditional sense of what you believe when you think of war. It's just not going to happen. President Donald Trump has been very clear that he wants these two countries to get to the negotiating table. It seemed like potentially last week there was an opportunity for that to happen. President Donald Trump hinted at the fact that he would be willing to visit Turkey, make a pit stop on his Middle East trip last week to join negotiations if the Russian president decided he was going to show up. Unfortunately, he chose not to, that being the Russian president decided to sit everything out. That, of course, caused some stir and some controversy. But here's the reality. The United States has already invested too much in this war. And you can't go back and turn the clocks back. right? You can't go back and change what happened. Now, fortunately, the mineral rights deal that we talked about back a couple of weeks ago, that is at least a small attempt to make the United States whole as it relates to the hundreds of billions of dollars that in many cases you would argue has been wasted as it relates to this war. So you're not going to get all of that money back. The mineral rights deal at least gives the United States some vested interest in the sovereignty of Ukraine, gives the United States some vested interest in the very rich mineral resources that are available in portions of that country. So that there is some things that are progressing in the right direction. Now, I don't trust the Russian president at all. I am a strong believer that he could have had a great conversation on the phone yesterday with Trump, that he could have told the president, absolutely, we're going to work towards a ceasefire, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then change his mind as early as something like today. It appears obvious that there's only so many more attempts at this that are going to take place. Trump put this out yesterday. It's a significant development, unlike anything that you saw under the Biden administration. It's a significant development in the ongoing war, and I hope it works out. The details are rather sparse. He seems to be trying to utilize the trade magnitude and mightiness of the United States, especially in these negotiations with Russia. That seems like it could be a pretty good bargaining chip, and getting Putin to the table and actually having him sit down and discuss actual negotiations and actual agreements here to get this squared away. So that's the latest this morning. Seems to be a very underreported story. You can imagine if this was going on as it related to the previous administration, how every single news outlet across the United States would be jumping for joy and talking about how much of a strong leader Joe Biden is, and only he had the fortitude and the ability to get this conversation started and to get this ball rolling. But because it's President Donald Trump, it's relatively underreported. So nothing set in stone. Trump announced that these talks are set to begin immediately. We'll wait for some additional details on that and provide details as soon as we get them. In a major win for the administration yesterday, the Supreme Court is allowing the Trump administration to end deportation protections for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan migrants as the legal battle over the matter continues. So this being a major win from the High Court yesterday in its request to temporarily lift a lower court's injunction that blocked the Department of Homeland Security, that's DHS, from revoking temporary protection status for Venezuelan nationals. It was a 7-1 vote, with liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, a Biden appointee, being the only member to dissent with the order. No surprise there. Ketanji Brown Jackson is a radical progressive on the court, so you can't say that you're shocked or surprised. This ruling, however, will allow DHS to move forward with its intention to unwind some of the temporary protection statuses for roughly 300,000 Venezuelan nationals that are currently in the United States, which sets up the ability for deportation to begin taking place if they choose not to leave the country. Going back to this temporary protected status, this TPS, it was created by Congress back in 1990, and it provides certain deportation protections and work eligibility to those who receive its designation, including those unlawfully in the United States. Over the last few decades since its inception, various administrations have designated TPS for foreign nationals living stateside whose home countries are experiencing any number of situations that may make it dangerous for them to return, such as ongoing military conflicts or natural disasters. This is where things get kind of interesting. Shortly after assuming office, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem announced that she would be revoking a last-minute extension of the temporary protected status that came in the final hours of the Biden administration. And that's no surprise either. We saw as Joe Biden was walking out the door, the auto pen was feverishly operating in the back room and signing all of these preemptive pardons and doing all of these last minute things because they lost, because they were unsuccessful in convincing American voters that Orange Man was bad and that Democrats were better. So in the final days and the final hours of the Biden administration, you had every last ditch, every last minute attempt to I believe, not only CYA, cover President Joe Biden and his colleagues' rear ends, but also an attempt to block and stonewall the upcoming administration. And from a pure political standpoint, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, President Donald Trump, when you talk about deportation, that's not like something that the Biden administration didn't know about. I mean, he ran his entire presidential campaign talking about deportations. So they attempted in their final days and hours to set up, as I believe, as many roadblocks as possible for the incoming administration because they have an ideological disagreement with how the president operates and how people like Kristi Noem and Tom Homan want to operate. So with this last minute extension, those Venezuelan nationals would not lose, would have lost their deportation protection by April the 7th of this year. So the Trump administration came in, Kristi Noem said, hey, we're revoking that extension. Of course, what happened? A California federal judge blocked the order in March, arguing that the program had broad implications and terminating these protections could harm the economy. Oh, well, thank God. I mean, if it wasn't for this California judge, the U.S. economy would be a barren wasteland this morning. You know, has there been any discussion from any of these federal judges that are blocking the Trump administration about the economic impact of mass migration? It seems kind of ironic that if you are so pissed off and frustrated about economic impacts and so ticked off about, oh, well, this could have huge economic blah, 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 that you wouldn't feel the same way as it relates to people coming into the country. So once again, a federal district judge attempting to be the president, attempting to insert themselves into the executive branch, of which DHS Secretary Kristi Noem is a part of, because they don't like the rules, they don't like the decisions, they don't like the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. With that, the Trump administration later filed an emergency relief application with the Supreme Court, with a vast majority of Supreme Court justices yesterday allowing the White House to end TPS, that temporary protected status, for Venezuelans while the legal challenge continues. The Supreme Court brief stated, should criteria be denied, this shall terminate automatically. In the event that it is gathered, the stay shall terminate upon the sending down of a judgment of this court, meaning whatever the court decides to do, that will be the final decision. Venezuelan migrants have flocked to the United States in mass in recent years, largely fleeing economic instability under socialism. That would be the great president there, Nicolas Maduro. Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan nationals were encountered by Border Patrol and other immigration agents during the Biden administration, according to data available from CBP, that's Customs and Border Protection. Among those seeking refuge in the United States have included members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan prison and street gang that has established a presence across the country. Tren de Aragua gangbangers have been accused of deadly shootings, home invasions, and even taking control of entire apartment complexes. You've seen all the stories. You've read all about Tren de Aragua. No surprise, no shock there. 2 Tren de Aragua gang members have been arrested, by the way, in North Carolina over the last couple of months as well. President Joe Biden granted TPS to Venezuelans in 2021 and again in 2023. On January 10th, less than 10 days before President Donald Trump was to be sworn back into office, the Biden administration extended these protections for TPS holders, allowing them to keep their status until October of 2026. Critics of TPS have long argued that the program is temporary in name only, with extensions for countries being made repeatedly over years. The Trump administration in February also revoked TPS extension for Haitian nationals, arguing that the Biden White House tried to keep protections in place for far longer than it was necessary. So what you've got here is a major win for Trump. And this in itself is kind of what you would have expected. As we've watched the, what I'll call lawlessness of Democrats on various judicial benches unfold, this inevitably was the end result. As these various court cases, as these various blocks or stays or temporary injunctions, whatever, as these things made their way through the proper channels in the court system and up to in the case of the country's highest court, the United States Supreme Court, it seems obvious that many of these lower court decisions, many of these very partisan in nature decisions coming out from various judges, in this case California, would probably be thrown out because these judges do not have the authority to operate in the manner in which they are. These judges do not have the ability to tell the President of the United States he can or can't do things as it relates to things that are solely under his responsibility. Now, every case is unique. Every case is different. You can't paint with a broad brush and say, oh, well, because this happened, this. Every case is different. There's new facts. There's different things that come to light. They're all unique. But I think this is really setting the standard for what we're likely to see with many of these other challenges, whether we're talking about executive orders, whether we're talking about pure administrative challenges, whether we're talking about the previous administration doing things on the way out the door, extending this TPS status for another 2 years. It goes from 2021 to 2026. This would have been in place. I would argue at that point, it's no longer temporary protected status. Something that is in place for 5 years is no longer temporary, right? Everybody's done a little home repair or something like that. And, I'm just going to temporarily do this. I'll come back and fix it later. It never happens, right? The temporary fix becomes the permanent fix. We're all guilty of that. This is exactly what it seems obvious what the incentive was to extend this temporary protected status. Just keep it going ad nauseum. It's not temporary for 5 years. Just Venezuelans got problems with their economy, absolutely. But that doesn't garner full-on, migration to the United States with no consequences. And this TPS status, which essentially means you can't deport these individuals. It's absurd. And I'm glad to see that the United States Supreme Court, even most of the liberal justices on the Supreme Court, minus Ketanji Jackson Brown, decided that this was the right decision to be made by this court. So a major notch in the belt there for President Donald Trump as he continues to work through his very important immigration policy here in the United States. We've got an update this morning as it relates to multiple members of Congress and their attempt back a couple of weeks ago, actually just last week, I should say, to insurrect a facility. These members of Congress, not invited, decided that they were going to try and storm their way into an immigration and customs enforcement detention center in Newark, New Jersey. You had the Newark mayor who was arrested, then went all over cable news talking about how he's going to fight. He is going to stand up to the big, bad, evil, awful Trump administration and fight the dictatorship. He was arrested and charged. We'll see how that plays out. But yet late last night, we learned details that Representative LaMonica McIver, a Democrat out of New Jersey in the House of Representatives, was charged with assaulting, resisting, and impeding law enforcement officers during that event in Delaney Hall, Newark, New Jersey last week. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and acting U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Alina Habba, who is a badass, she's phenomenal, revealed that MacIver was being charged. Noem noted that, quote, "No one is above the law." Oh man, do I love that. Take all of these ridiculous left-wing talking points and shove it right back in their face. Now, I genuinely believe that no one is above the law. And so when I say no one is above the law, I in fact mean it. When Democrats say that no one is above the law, when they are sending the FBI to raid the house of a former president in the middle of the night, when they are using the Department of Justice to throw their political opponents in jail, they will yell and scream and cheer about how no one is above the law. However, then when you question their own lawless activities, well, they don't want to have a discussion about that. Well, they don't really have anything to say there. So when the left says no one is above the law, they're full of it. They are gaslighting you into justifying what they're doing because they don't believe that. They believe that they are, in fact, above the law. Democrats believe that as long as what they are doing they feel moral and right and just about, then it's okay, regardless of whether it's in the face of the law or not. Because, we're Democrats, we're liberals. Everything with us is touchy-feely feelings. So as long as we feel good about it, as long as we feel like it's the right thing to do, then it's justified. And we'll let it play out in the course of public opinion. So I love the fact that Kristi Noem says no one is above the law, just throwing this crap right back in their face. The announcement of charges against MacIver comes after Representative MacIver, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Robert Menendez, and Newark Mayor Ras Baraka showed up at Delaney Hall last week to conduct federal oversight, that's what they said, of the facility and allegedly stormed and trespassed. Baraka ended up being arrested for criminal trespassing. No surprise there. Noem writing in a post on X, quote, "After thorough review of video footage of Delaney Hall and a full investigation from HSI, the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey has made the determination to charge Congresswoman LaMonica MacIver for assaulting, resisting, and impeding law enforcement officers. No one is above the law. If any person, regardless of political party, influence, or status, assaults a law enforcement officer, as we witnessed Congresswoman MacIver do, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We thank our brave ICE law enforcement officers for their service to this great nation." U.S. Attorney Alina Habba also announced in a press release posted to X that her office agreed to dismiss Baraka's misdemeanor charges of trespass and added that she had invited him to a tour to Delaney Hall, noting this: "After extensive consideration, we have agreed to dismiss the mayor's misdemeanor charge of trespass for the sake of moving forward. In the spirit of public interest, I have invited the mayor to tour Delaney Hall. The government has nothing to hide at this facility, and I will personally accompany the mayor so he can see it firsthand." Now, this is a great move by the acting U.S. Attorney in Alina Habba. It's a phenomenal move here. He was charged with misdemeanor trespass, which is not a serious charge. Now, if you were a J6er, that charge would supply you with 4 years in prison, never to see or talk to your family again, something like that. But in an attempt to move forward with this, Alina Habba says, okay, yeah, we'll dismiss these charges. You'll come on a tour with me at the facility, and we'll move forward. And I think that's a very strategic thing to do. Now, I know some folks are eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I'm not always a fan of that approach. And in this case, I think you gain far more political points by doing this the way that she's done so. She noted that the citizens of New Jersey deserve unified leadership so that we can get to work to keep our state safe. The dismissal against the mayor is not the end of this matter. Congressional oversight is an important constitutional function and one that I fully support. However, this is not an issue in this case. She explained that Congresswoman McIver had assaulted, impeded, and interfered with law enforcement in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 111A, adding that her conduct cannot be overlooked. Now, the representative from New Jersey has in fact responded. Now, I showed you the video last week. And before I show you her statement, I would once again like to show you the video of this congresswoman in the way in which she acted. You can see her there in the red dress or the red jacket. She is pushing and shoving law enforcement. You can see her right there, body checking this guy in the green that's in front of her, pushing her hands all over the place. Not only is she assaulting law enforcement, but she is impeding the work of law enforcement. Right there, you can see her punch somebody, I believe he's wearing a blue police jacket. You can see her punch him in the back. She's assaulting law enforcement. The video evidence is very clear. And in the eyes of the law, when you think of somebody being assaulted, in the eyes of the law, if you're going to put your hands on somebody else and it's unwarranted, that is assault. And if there is a good enough case brought against you, you will be charged with assault. You do not have to beat somebody senselessly to get an assault charge. Simply putting your hands on somebody else is enough to get that to take place. And in this case, she more than put her hands on somebody else. You can see her throwing a fist at the back of a guy's head and then shoving another member of law enforcement. So there's the video evidence, right? There's not really much much wiggle room for what you saw there. So let's see what she has to say in response. Here's the statement from Congresswoman McIver. Earlier this month, I joined my colleagues to inspect the treatment of ICE detainees at Delaney Hall in my district. We were fulfilling our lawful oversight responsibilities. As a member of Congress, have done many times before, and our visit should have been peaceful and short. Instead, ICE agents created an unnecessary and unsafe confrontation when they chose to arrest the Newark mayor, Mayor Baraka. These charges against me are purely political. They mischaracterize and distort my actions and are meant to criminalize and deter legislative oversight. This administration will never stop me from working for the people in our district and standing up for what is right. I am thankful for the outpouring of support I have received, and I look forward to the truth being laid out clearly in court. Well, where do we begin with that statement? The charges are purely political. Well, the charges against the mayor in Newark have been dropped. So if you're going to argue that these are purely political, both Congresswoman McIver and Mayor Baraka of Newark are both Democrats. His charges, his misdemeanor trespassing charges, were dropped by the acting attorney in New Jersey. So let's just take that. We'll take that as it stands by itself. And it's hard for me to make the argument that it's purely political. If that was the case, then I can't imagine why the mayor's charges would have been dropped. She notes that they are mischaracterized and distort her actions. Her actions are very clear on video. You don't have to have a expertise in law enforcement or criminology to look at what she was doing and see that she was punching law enforcement. She was throwing her arms, her hands, and her body towards law enforcement. So she claims it's mischaracterized. This is what I find to be the interesting piece of this all, and it goes back to the argument I was making before. Listen, I'm going to read this again for you. This administration will never stop me from working for the people in our district and standing up for what is right. That's the last couple of words there in the sentence are the key points right here. Standing up for what is right. This is the issue that Democrats face right now. They are dealing with a major struggle politically, and they are having a very hard time of discerning what is lawful and what do they feel right about. And that's a very dangerous place to be. Standing up for what is right when it is in the face of the law will cause you to likely be charged criminally. Now, we can have a moral argument of whether a law is right or wrong, sure. For example, there's many discussions going on across the United States and in many states about decriminalizing and allowing the use of recreational marijuana. You've seen many states do that. Many states have not chosen to do that. And so when individuals decide that they are going to use marijuana in a state where it's not legal, they are opening themselves up to some sort of potential criminal complaint. Now, for most folks, that's not a big issue. You're likely not going to be thrown in prison. But the reality is, it's illegal. And whether you feel that weed should be lawful or not is irrelevant. It's the rules of the state in which you operate, the rules of the state in which you are living and doing these activities that matter. And I hate to sound like such a curmudgeon here, but it doesn't matter what you feel is right or feel is wrong. If it's against the law, it's against the law. Punching ICE officials in the back of the head, body checking members of law enforcement is assault. If you walked into downtown Wilmington today and walked up to a member of the Wilmington Police Department and body checked them with your arms in front of you, I can guarantee you your ass is going to be thrown in cuffs and in the back of a cop car. There is no doubt in my mind. I would not encourage you to do that. I will not be doing that for the sake of making a point, because you are guaranteed to be arrested and charged with assaulting a law enforcement officer, because that's what you're doing. It's illegal. It's a crime. Whether you believe you were standing up for something right or not is completely irrelevant. And this is the issue that the left faces right now. They are so wrapped up in their feelings. They are so wrapped up in the media hysteria over Orange Man bad that they cannot remove their head from their rear end. They are just so stuck in that position. The video evidence is clear. I'll show it to you again. I mean, this is her punching and pushing members of law enforcement. You can see her striking a guy with a police jacket on, body checking a guy who's in full-on military gear. That's assault. Whether she believes it's assault or not, that's going to be for a court of law to decide. However, if I was her, I would not want this video evidence out there at all. And I would hope and pray that this does not get introduced as evidence during the court hearing or court proceedings, because any jury looking at this goes, oh yeah, no, that's absolutely assault. When they are read jury instructions from the judge as to, well, what exactly defines assault, and the judge lays that out, this is going to fit that definition if it goes forward in this manner. But again, she did nothing wrong. Once again, Democrats, they're in the clear. They should not be held responsible for their actions. Again, you and I do this just out on a random day. We're in jail. We're charged. We're prosecuted, as we should be. She should have to deal with the same consequences that you and I do, because unlike the left, I genuinely believe that no one is above the law. I genuinely believe that whether you are a member of Congress or a random citizen, if you're going to punch a member of law enforcement, if you're going to shove a member of law enforcement, that you should in fact be charged. I know that that's a radical idea, a radical notion for the left, because their feelings over immigration policy are more important than law enforcement. But that's just the simple fact and the simple reality. Again, a very tough issue for them to deal with. I wish I could sit here and say that, I have some sympathy, but I don't. And I love this. This is the headline from NBC News. I wanted to bring this up to you. Breaking. United States Justice Department says charges have been filed against a New Jersey congresswoman alleging she assaulted law enforcement at Newark ICE Detention Center. Allegedly she did this? What about the video that I just showed you that proves that that's the case? I mean, the evidence there is pretty clear. But of course, as you go through the NBC News article, MacIver told reporters that she was in fact she was the one that was assaulted by law enforcement. Just typical projection and gaslighting from the left. You guys talked about for years about the importance of the rule of law and everybody being held accountable. You talked about how important it was for people, regardless of their political status, regardless of where they sit in elected office, to be held responsible. You didn't believe it when you said it, and now it's coming back and biting you squarely in the rear end. And it should, because we should always have and always support equal law enforcement. We should always support equal prosecution, regardless of your race, regardless of your sex, your gender, your social status. None of that stuff should matter. It matters to the left because they don't want to be held responsible for their own actions. And the fact of the matter is it's because they're hypocrites. They're complete and total hypocrites. So I mentioned that we would keep an eye on this case. We'll do so as well, and we'll see. Getting some comments coming in this morning. Leslie is commenting over on our YouTube channel and says, I hope she gets expelled from Congress. Mike Johnson started it and with one of the three options that they could take. Oh, absolutely. I mean, now, obviously, I don't know how this legal challenge is going to take place. But even if she's convicted of a federal crime, she does not automatically lose her seat. So she will have to be forced out of that position. They had no problem kicking out old George Santos for his, lying about everything that he was doing, lying about his background, spending money inappropriately. So they should have no issue throwing her out of Congress as well for being somebody that's assaulting law enforcement. That, to me, that sets a very dangerous precedent. So we'll continue to track the very brave Representative LaMonica MacIver as she continues her battle for right versus wrong in the United States Congress and in her home state of New Jersey. We'll keep a very close eye on that. I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington this morning, talking a lot about law on the show. When legal challenges arise, trust the law group in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating real estate transactions, or you're in a position where you need a strong defense, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures that your questions are answered and that the issues that you're having are resolved as quickly as possible. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call this morning, 910-251-6088, or visit their website, lawgroupnc.com. They've got a full list of all of the areas of practice, a great blog on their website as well, where they discuss and go through a variety of legal issues and challenges, all of that available on their website, lawgroupnc.com. It's the law group, experience and dedication that you can rely on. We appreciate their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. Well, on Friday, there was a major announcement out of the Moody's credit rating agency as it related to the U.S.'s essentially credit score. We'll dive into some details with economist Dr. Vance Ginn coming up here in just a few minutes as the Nick Craig Show rolls on live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, and X, and 24/7, wherever you get your podcasts. There was a pretty big announcement last week as it related to the U.S. economy. Moody's, the credit rating agency, has downgraded the United States credit rating. To walk us through some details this morning on that and what the relevance is this morning, economist Dr. Vance Ginn joins me this morning on the Nick Craig Show. Vance, as always, thank you so much for the time. This is a pretty big story out last Friday. What's it matter here to people listening this morning?
Yeah, always a pleasure with you, Nick. And it is a big story. Moody's, which is one of the credit rating agencies that really go in and look at debt and everything else, what they did was they looked at the U.S. debt and whether our ability to pay for it over time and given the fiscal situation that we're in now, and they downgraded our debt. This is the Treasury security, the debt, national debt. They downgraded it from AAA to AA plus. So just down. And this is the first time in many years, in decades really, that Moody's has dropped it. We've seen Fitch downgrade the U.S. debt back in 2011, and then in 2023 they downgraded it, but not for Moody's. And so this is another credit rating agency that's highlighting the high cost of our national debt and excessive government spending. And I should mention, Nick, that I actually think they should have done this long ago. I mean, I think they're waiting a long time now, and now it makes it look political with the Trump White House trying to do what they're doing. This also should have happened during the Biden years. We've had plenty of years of problems, and now this is going to reap itself in higher mortgage rates and higher car loan rates that are going to hit all Americans because of their downgrade now. And so I have some questions about why that is, but glad to talk to you about this.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that this is obviously the first time Moody's has done this, but other agencies going back more than a decade have done this. And of course, Vance, I think there is a relevant political angle with this. President Trump's been in office 130 some odd days or something like that now. And so many folks on the left pointing the finger at Trump and saying it's his fault. But in some of your postings over the weekend on X, Vance, you seem to believe that this is a true bipartisan issue, which is, I guess, spending being out of control.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've seen it most recently on steroids under the Biden administration. And so that really brought up the national debt to where it is now to close to $37 trillion. And remember, that's well above our economic output per year. That's closer to 30 trillion, 27, 28 trillion dollars. And so we have a massive amount of debt out there. But it hasn't just been Democrats in the Biden administration. It was also Republicans that were in Congress at the time. And then the Trump White House, which I was a part of, but there was too much spending. And we got to remember that the power of the purse is in Congress's hands. At the end of the day, the president can't control the amount of spending that's going on. I guess they could control some of the revenue with the tariffs and other things that are happening here recently. But this has been a bipartisan problem for decades now. In fact, Nick, you'd have to go back 100 years ago, an entire century, to where we had spending restraint under Calvin Coolidge, Harding and then Calvin Coolidge, to see spending come down, not in nominal terms, not just in real terms, and also to see tax cuts. So they were focused on restraining spending and incentivizing more economic growth in the economy. And I think that's what we need now. We need the Trump tax cuts to be made permanent, but we also need the spending to be restrained, because if not, we're going to continue to run massive deficits and debt.
Vance, next year we will have midterm elections. We will see Republicans and Democrats face off in the Senate and the House, power struggles over which party will control that for the final 2 years of the Trump administration. You will hear ad nauseum both Republicans and Democrats talk about spending and debt. Do they actually mean anything when they say this, Vance? I feel like I've heard this, and many folks will say they've heard this their entire lives. Nobody really seems to be actually serious about the problem.
It's one of those things, Nick, before they get into office, on the campaign trail and everything else, it sounds good to a lot of the grassroots folks. We've got to get control of our national debt. And then they get up to Washington and all that changes. You get brought into the swamp, and then the swamp, the interest groups and everyone else really comes after you. And this is a big problem. And it makes it to where we have budget inertia, is what I like to call it. They just consider the last base year budget, what they passed last year, and increase it by that amount, or increase it based on that base budget year after year after year. And that's what's got us in this situation now, to where the budget is $7 trillion. I was in the White House, like I said, at OMB in 2019. The budget was $4.5 trillion. We've increased by $2.5 trillion, substantial increase in just a few years. And that was during COVID and the shutdowns and everything else. And that's one reason why I think when Elon Musk joined Doge, and they came in and wanted to find $2 trillion in savings. A lot of that savings comes from reducing what Biden was doing during the lockdowns, along with what Trump was doing as well from Congress. And I think that's something they should do. Unfortunately, we didn't get all that out of Doge so far. We've got about $160 billion in savings. We need to find a lot more. And this is one reason why, I do join my friends like Chip Roy and Congressman Roy and others that say we've got to focus on the spending. At the same time, we've got to make sure that these tax cuts are extended and hopefully made permanent, because they will also expire at the end of the year. And Nick, as you know, families and businesses don't like uncertainty. And that's what we have right now between the taxes and the tariffs and everything else. There's just so much uncertainty out there that many businesses that I'm talking to across the country are just saying, you know what, I can't make investments right now because the future is just so uncertain.
Yeah, it's uncertain from a pure economic standpoint. It's uncertain from tariffs, which you and I have chatted about over the last couple of months as well. So going back to the issue at hand this morning, Moody's announced on Friday that they were lowering the United States credit rating. Most people are not in debt to the United States. Maybe some folks play around with treasuries and bonds and things of that nature. Normal people are not holding vast swaths of U.S. debt. So why should the U.S. consumer care about something like this? Why is it relevant?
Yeah, most of the debt is held by corporations and investments and other banks. Even some people from foreign countries will also hold them. The Federal Reserve holds part of the national debt. So you're right. It's not necessarily just the individuals, but you got to make sure that you understand that a lot of your 401k or other types of investments that are exchange traded funds will also be in treasury securities to deal with some of that risk. And you can be losing some of that money whenever it goes in there, because what we've seen is whenever they said that they're downgrading the debt of the United States, what does that mean? Well, it decreases the demand for the bonds that are out there, and that pushes down prices and up interest rates. And that part, the higher interest rates, is what influences families and individuals all across the country. If you want to go out and get a mortgage, those rates are probably going to go up about 50 basis points or 0.5%. So if it was 8%, it could be 8.5% now just in a day. And that's the sort of situation that you have when you have debt crises like we have now, along with this debt downgrade. And it may not last a long time. It may be all politically motivated, but it does indicate to me of what there is across the economy, because we do see that there's too much national debt, and this is going to influence families who are already strapped with the affordability crisis across the country to really see, you know what, I'm going to pay a lower interest rate. Well, no, and now after this debt downgrade, I'm going to pay a higher interest rate in my mortgage. This will start hitting people's pocketbooks quickly.
And I'm glad you bring up the interest rates, because it is something that normal, regular, everyday people deal with, whether it's a house, car, maybe carrying some credit card debt. President Donald Trump has been very colorful in some of his language as it relates to interest rates with the Federal Reserve Chairman. Where do we stand on all of that right now for interest rates?
The most recent Fed meeting, FOMC, Federal Market Committee, they kept the rate unchanged at 4.25 to 4.5%. So they didn't lower it like what maybe Trump and some of the administration would like to help out with some of the economic slowdown from their tariffs and trade war sort of policy. But at the same time, it indicates to me, because when you look at the balance sheet of the Fed, it's still about where it was, around almost $7 trillion, which is still substantially above the $4 trillion it was before the pandemic. Money supply is also going back up, Nick. And so when you see money supply going back up, that means more inflationary pressures. It's one of the reasons why I think the stock market rebounded so quickly, because where else are you going to go? You have all these tariff effects, these announcement effects, which dropped the stock market tremendously. There wasn't really a huge change in the economics and the structural economy, but the stock market went right back up. Now, some of that was because Trump, paused the tariffs on China and some other countries. But at the same time, I think what it indicates to me is that people are wanting to find some real returns on their assets, and they're looking for wherever that's going to be. So if you give them more certainty in one area, they're going to join that. And this is also what I think is going to hurt families, though. Too much uncertainty drives more uncertainty in families' incomes, their budgets, and even having a job. And that's why I think we shouldn't go down this tariff, high inflationary route from the Federal Reserve and from the president, but instead should be looking for pro-growth policies that will allow for more economic growth and prosperity.
Vance, there's been a lot of discussion of the big, beautiful bill, some movement on that in the House of Representatives over the last couple of weeks. But even with that, many hardline fiscal conservatives have come out and said, this is not necessarily what we're looking for from a fiscally responsible standpoint. Have you been following that at all?
Oh yeah, I mean it's the main thing on a lot of people's minds right now, and you're right. The House Appropriations Committee passed theirs. Was it last night? They passed their portion of the bill, or on Sunday evening. But then at the same time, there's an issue of a lot of the cuts, because they're supposed to find spending cuts of 1.5 trillion according to the House reconciliation bills and guardrails they put in there. But a lot of those cuts, Nick, are in the out years. So they'll have the extension of the tax cuts, which will bring about more economic growth, but you also could have a decline in revenue, while at the same time making the spending cuts over the next 10 years not really start until 3 or 4 years from now. So what could happen then is then they change the policy later. And so a lot of the hardliners and fiscal hawks, which I consider myself to be a fiscal hawk, what we'd like is for those cuts to happen immediately. Don't push them out in the future. Let's have them now. This is what was so important about Elon Musk's Doge, is all the fraud, waste, and abuse. If we can get some of that weeded out now, which not all of that is included in the reconciliation package, and removing those, which they should, then why would we expect for us to have those cuts happen later? That's my big concern, Nick, is that we're going to have the tax cuts happen now, and we're not going to get any spending cuts, and then they're going to come in and raise spending later, and we'll never see those sort of cuts happen on spending. And spending is ultimately the main problem of government. We don't have a revenue problem, we got a spending problem. And so while there is some pushback of what these fiscal hawks are doing, I think it's an important part of this process, because if you have Republican control in the president, the Senate, and the House, and you can't do anything about spending, when are we going to do something about spending, which is the main driver of why the debt crisis going to Moody's downgrade is so important?
And many folks would say if you can't do that with an all-Republican slate there, you may be doomed. But Vance, let me ask you this from a pure political standpoint. If you look at polling, economic pressures are consistently a top issue for American people. And the concept, when they hear from their members of Congress, whether that be House or Senate members, about cutting spending, that is a popular idea. What is the holdup in Congress with something? We're not talking about slashing Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, things that are traditionally seen as very politically toxic. We're talking about cutting across the board government spending. Why is this such a hard pill to swallow in D.C.?
Well, one, it goes back to the kind of lobbying and other interest groups that come into this process for rent-seeking opportunities, so they can make sure they get their tax credit or their handout or whatever else. But one other thing too about the reconciliation is, why don't you go to reconciliation? You only can do it one time per fiscal year, and it's because the Senate usually has to have a 60-vote majority to support these bills, to pass them. Well, this allows them to get a simple majority, which Republicans have in both in the Senate and therefore in the House as well. But it also means that you can't do a lot of new spending items or spending cuts. It's supposed to be more of a tax or revenue side bill. So there can be some changes, but not a lot of big policy changes. To your point, you can't touch Social Security, you can't touch Medicare. So one of the big areas is Medicaid, of imposing work requirements, which should already be a part of the system. Many of these states have taken waivers, and now it's about getting it back to where it was once before. We need major reforms in Medicaid, as too many people who are work capable, able-bodied people, are getting a lot in Medicaid when they otherwise should not. And this is a major issue, because if we don't start addressing these issues now, to your point and my point of Republicans being in charge, when are we? And I don't think that we will. And so this is a big point to really be made, even as there's a lot of tension in D.C. And, Nick, I kind of like the tension, because I think there needs to be something that starts pushing them towards limiting spending, sustainable budgets, and allowing for more pro-growth policies, compared to just using this Keynesian sort of ideology of more spending and more debt.
Vance, you talk about these issues in a variety of different formats. You've got a podcast, newsletter, some comments on social media as well. How can folks track what you're doing and keep up to date with you?
Yeah, Nick, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Vance Ginn.com is probably one of the best places, but also is a good one is on X at Vance Ginn, VanceGinn. And that has links to my podcast, the Let People Prosper Show, my Substack newsletter, and a whole bunch more. And hopefully your audience will go check it out, because my main point is to let people prosper. And we've got to have more people doing that, like you're talking about, like I'm talking about, and others are out there.
Vance, thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Appreciate Vance Ginn's time this morning. Again, you can visit his website, Vance Ginn, VanceGinn.com. His Let the People Prosper podcast is a great resource, something to watch throughout the week as well, and his X account, especially if you're interested in getting some increased analysis into some economic news as it relates to politics. As Vance mentioned during the interview, he did spend time in the first Trump administration, was in OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Great resource there. Always appreciate chatting with Vance. He joined me. Vance and I have been together for years now, back on the old radio show as well, so always appreciate his time. Well, hey, coming up tomorrow morning, we are going to be doing a deep dive into what was a very interesting New Hanover County Board of Commissioners meeting yesterday, unveiling the proposed tax plan and budget for the fiscal year coming up. That will, as it stands right now, include a major tax increase for those citizens across New Hanover County. We'll dive into some details on that coming up tomorrow morning. Once again, I want to thank the Law Group for their continued support of the show. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Thanks for joining us live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, and X, and 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great Tuesday. We're back with you tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.